Here are 3 tips to help you get better at every single killer in Dead by Daylight. Trapper. Always have a trap on hand so you can use it in chase. Many times you can bait a player to leave the loop by pretending to place a trap, or if you have them zoned in a corner, you can use the trap to force them to loop wide and get a free hit. If a survivor went down to the basement to get a save, place your trap at the top of the stairs on this corner. Most survivors will take note of any traps on their way down, but won't expect a new trap on the way up. If you're looping someone and think they're about to stun you with a pallet, start placing your trap. For some reason, this slightly changes your hitbox so you won't get stunned. Wraith. One of the best parts of his power is the fact that you're faster than survivors while cloaked. Take advantage of this by getting in front of survivors to body block the pallet or window and get a free hit. Since your power is great for catching survivors in bad positions, but not very good in chase, your best bet is to do the hit and run playstyle, meaning if you know where a different survivor is while you're in chase, injure the current person you're chasing, and then go find the other survivor to injure them. This provides you with more opportunities later in the match to catch them off guard while they're injured. Remember that you are completely invisible to survivors while cloaked if you're at least 20 meters away from them, so don't bother trying to avoid big open areas to flank survivors until you get closer. Hillbilly. Many times people will go for chainsaw hits in situations where it's almost impossible to get. Remember that you don't always need to use your chainsaw. It's okay to get regular basic attack hits to build pressure. If you're on PC, put Q and E as secondary keybinds for turning left and right. This will allow you to infinitely turn without having to worry about the amount of mousepad space that you have. If you're back revving a survivor, meaning you waited until you were close to them before using your chainsaw, try to keep your camera still as you're revving your chainsaw until the survivor goes in front of you. If you're constantly moving your chainsaw to track the survivor, you may accidentally flick yourself really off target because of his initial chainsaw sensitivity since you're moving your camera. Nurse. In most situations, you'll want to use your first blink to go to the survivor's last known location. This is the most consistent way to use her in chase because if the survivor tries to double back, you can hit them, but if they continue running, you can use your second blink to hit them. When traversing the map, it's generally better to only use single blinks until you find a survivor because the cooldown is shorter. The only time you should realistically use your second blink for traversal is if you're trying to get through a specific wall or to another story to gather information. There is a common misconception that breaking pallets is the dumbest thing you can do as Nurse since she completely ignores pallets. And while yes, in most situations, there is quite literally 0 point in breaking pallets, occasionally you will get a pallet that can actually benefit survivors. For example, certain pallets can make it difficult for you to gain line of sight on survivors before blinking, which means you have to gamble where they are. In these situations, it may be worth to break the pallet to provide you with an opportunity to walk around the wall to see the survivor's location before blinking. There are also some survivors that'll throw pallets to have additional resources for using Lithe, so just keep that in mind too. Obviously, you shouldn't break every pallet that's thrown, but realistically, spending a couple seconds to break a single pallet that may benefit you a little bit is worth it. Myers. Stalking survivors from further away fills up your stock meter faster than if you stalk them while close, so try to stalk from far away if you're trying to quickly tier up. 99 your tier 3 so you can selectively choose when to use it. If you're chasing a single survivor, it may not be worth to start tier 3 since you can potentially only get one down with it. Wait to use it until survivors are grouped up to get more value. Remember that you have a significantly faster vault speed while in tier 3. I don't see enough Myers players using this to your advantage. This is one of the strongest aspects of his kit because there are so many mind games that you can do at windows that will give you free downs, especially if you're using perks like Bamboozle or Superior Anatomy, which both make your vault speed much quicker. Hag. Never put traps close to one another. I see so many Hag players putting traps in close proximity to each other and it's completely pointless. If a survivor triggers a trap and you insta teleport and hit them, they will gain a speed boost and sprint away, likely triggering the other traps that are close by before your weapon cooldown is even over. So at that point, you've just wasted time and wasted a bunch of traps for no reason. Make sure they're spread out enough to prevent this from happening. Try to put your traps in locations that cover multiple resources or entrances. For example, putting a trap here not only covers this loop so you can use it in chase, but it'll also go off for anyone who drops down this hole after throwing the pallet, giving you a free hit. Placing traps is a great way to bait survivors from hiding if you think they're going for a flashlight or pallet save. When you start to place a trap, it looks very similar to the animation of picking up a survivor, which instinctively triggers survivors to run toward you to get the save. So feel free to do this bait and try to take advantage of this. Bonus tip: if you have a survivor in the basement, put your trap in this corner. This will prevent survivors from seeing it, so they may think the coast is clear and will accidentally trigger it. Doctor. Remember that your shocks will interrupt pretty much every single action in the game. Trying to stop someone from cleansing your hex totem? Shock them. Trying to stop people from finishing a heal and you have sloppy butcher? Shock them, and then their healing will decrease. Even survivors that are trying to work on gens can be interrupted by your shock, which can trigger perks such as Dead Man's Switch. Your abilities are not only for anti-loop and information, they're also for slowdown, especially your static blast. Every time somebody is hit with your static blast, their madness goes up an entire tier, getting them one step closer to tier 3 where they can't even work on gens. So if you see multiple survivors in an area, it's still worth using your static blast to tier all of them up even though you know where they all are. Your static shock, however, only does half a tier per hit, so it's not as useful for this, but but it still may apply. Most of you know that you can see the auras of illusionary doctors through walls, but something a lot of you don't know is that this only applies if the survivors are in Madness 3. Yes, illusionary doctors show up for survivors in Madness 2, but you're unable to see their auras until Madness 3 illusionary doctors show up. So if you're using the lack of illusionary doctors to clear an area without going over to it, just keep in mind that they may not show up if they're only in Madness 2. Bonus tip: if a survivor threw Shack Pallet and is on the inside, shock them through this window and then instantly vault. Although this situation is rare, it will guarantee you a free hit. Huntress: when you're in the situation where you're holding a hatchet and the survivor is going back and forth trying to dodge it, just be patient and keep your camera still rather than trying to track them with your camera. When they go in front of you, that's when you throw the hatchet to get the hit. This will make your throws a lot more consistent. If you're chasing someone that's injured and they don't have any resources, always use your hatchet to injure them. Your hatchet cooldown is significantly shorter than hitting them normally, so you'll be able to catch up to them and down them much quicker. Always keep track of the good survivors and the bad survivors that you're facing. Generally, bad survivors will throw pallets and chase, which means you can get plenty of free hits by throwing a hatchet over the pallet. However, good players will greed the pallet for as long as possible to force a hit, so you should almost never respect the pallet against them. Bubba: if a survivor jumps into a locker to avoid your chainsaw, hit the locker to start your tantrum, then frantically spin in circles to make it difficult for the survivor to see when your tantrum ends. This will usually result in a free down because the survivor either jumps out too early, which downs them, or they stay in too long, resulting in a grab. Feathering your chainsaw is a great tactic to use against greedy survivors. Since you get slowed down when revving your chainsaw, many survivors may think you can get an extra loop in because they hear you rev your chainsaw, but if you feather it, meaning you tap it just to make the revving sound, but you don't actually continue to charge it, then you can catch these greedy survivors off guard to get a free hit. You should always use your chainsaw when coming up to a pallet loop because it forces survivors into 3 scenarios. 1, they can only loop it once before being forced to throw it. 2, they greed the pallet and end up dying. Or 3, they leave the loop, which should allow you to catch up to them if you use your tokens properly. Freddy: if you teleport to a generator or to survivors that are healing, you'll get Killer Instinct on anyone that is within 8 meters of your teleport location. So if you teleport and don't get Killer Instinct, that means that the 16-meter diameter around where you teleported to is completely clear, so there's no point in checking it. Hitting survivors with your Dream Snare while they're awake will not slow them down, but rather increase their sleep timer by 50%. This also happens if you hit them with Dream Pallets, but hitting awake survivors with your Dream Pallets will instantly put them to sleep but not damage them. The more survivors that there are asleep, the faster your teleport cooldown is. So if you have the playstyle of teleporting frequently, try to keep as many survivors asleep as possible. Pig: if you're in a loop and start your ambush, face one direction and then immediately flip to face the other direction. In most situations, this will completely throw survivors off, allowing you to get a free hit. Most people believe that your terror radius instantly disappears when crouching, but this isn't true. For Pig, it takes around 5 seconds before it fades out fully, so if you're trying to stealth towards a gen or something, make sure you account for this, although I personally think that stealthing as Pig is almost never worth it since she's so slow. However, the speed in which your terror radius fades out, as well as the movement speed while crouched, is getting buffed in the Walking Dead update, so do keep that in mind. There's a new quality of life update with the Pig where you can hold M1 while crouching, and it'll instantly start your ambush as soon as possible. You used to have to wait until your crouch animation finished before you started holding M1, but now you don't need to do that. Bonus tip: crouching will cause many survivors to leave the loop, so you can fake a crouch to make them leave the loop but have enough time to catch up to them before the next resource. Clown: don't only use your purple bottles to hit survivors, also use them to block certain areas of the map. This can force survivors into dead zones or away from resources, granting you a free hit even though you didn't hit them with your bottle. If you only have one bottle left, then switch to yellow bottles and throw it in the air or in front of you, then start to reload. This will let you have a slight speed boost when you finish reloading, rather than wasting that last bottle if you were going to reload anyway. If you throw your bottle on a high elevation such as a tree, it'll spread out over a much larger area. This is a very situational tip, but can help you lock down big portions of a loop. Spirit: since survivors have directional audio while phasing, fake phase in one direction and then switch to the other direction to throw them off. Since she moves so quickly and it's somewhat difficult to track her movements when she's close to you, you're almost guaranteed to get a hit. While traversing the map with her power, only use about half of it. By doing this, you're allowing yourself to get your power back quickly once you find a survivor, rather than having to wait the whole cooldown. Even if the survivor has Iron Will, you can still see where they're walking by observing the grass or bushes nearby. If you see the grass or bushes moving, you can tell exactly where they are. Plus, you can still hear their footsteps, especially on maps like Swamp where the muddy footsteps are quite loud. Legion. Even though it may seem counterintuitive, sometimes it's worth it to use your power even if survivors are already injured, especially if they're grouped up. Not only does it slow the game down because they all have to mend, it also gives you the chance to get your free 5th hit after hitting 4 survivors in your power. Unlike survivors, you're able to fast vault windows from any angle, so you don't need to be looking directly at it. Remember that good survivors will force a pallet stun when you're in your power by waiting for you to hit them on the other side of a pallet. It's never worth it to wait when they're doing this because they're guaranteed to get the stun. So just instantly swing through the pallet and accept that you're gonna get stunned. There's no point in wasting time. Plague. Click your screen when puking to create a shotgun-like projectile that'll guarantee you hit the survivor if they're trying to dodge it. This is especially useful with your Corrupt Purge. Most of you know that the more you puke on a healthy survivor, the faster their sickness meter increases. However, this will put a lot of Plague players on autopilot where they continuously loop a survivor while trying to puke on them. Some loops are just really bad for your power, so sometimes you'll save more time just getting them initially sick and then hitting them normally rather than struggling to get them more sick to get them injured. Remember that you can infect pretty much every single interactable object in the game. This includes pallets, windows, totems, lockers, and even exit gates, which can all give you free information on where people are and what they may be doing. Ghostface. In most situations, you want to 99 survivor stock meters so you can insta-down them when you get closer to them. However, don't do this in every situation. Sometimes it's worth it to mark them from far away if they're starting to reveal you, so you don't have to wait for your power to come back to make them exposed. Remember that hitting survivors will reset their stock meter, so if you have a decent amount of stock on someone and they're next to another survivor, the ideal thing to do would be to chase the survivor that doesn't have stock to make it easier for you later in the match. Don't exclusively use your power to traverse the map. It's also a very helpful tool in chase for many reasons. For one, you lose your red stain, which yes, you can hide by moonwalking, but sometimes survivors can see your red stain through walls. 2, it prevents you from having a tear radius, so it makes it more difficult for nearby survivors to find you if they're trying to take a hit or get a flashlight save or something. And 3, it can make survivors think that you left them in chase, so they drop their guard only for you to catch them in a bad position. Demogorgon. Using a fully charged shred gives you a ton of mobility when used off of a high ledge. However, take any object below you into account. There's a ton of objects that have hitboxes that prevent you from shredding over them, even if it looks like you can go over them. I think the worst offender of this is probably the hedges on Haddonfield, so it's difficult to jump off the balconies. A lot of Demogorgon players completely ignore the free information that you can get from your portals. Remember that if you hold your shred, you get Killer Instinct on anyone that's near an active portal, which can help you figure out if survivors are working on certain objectives or if they're trying to cleanse your portals. Whenever I watch people playing this killer, I rarely see them check for this information. Although it may seem counterintuitive, sometimes it's worth it to put 2 portals near each other, especially when you have less and less gens to patrol. Then use one to make it active and reveal it to survivors, but keep the other one invisible. Then if you're ever teleporting back to that area, you can teleport to the invisible portal, but the survivors will think they're safe because they don't see you coming out of the portal that they actually can see. Oni. Remember that Oni thrives off of injured survivors, so if you see a healthy survivor and an injured survivor, it's generally more beneficial to chase the healthy survivor, as this will allow you to have your power more frequently in the match. Of course, the situation depends, especially if you think you can down the injured survivor to get use out of perks like pop or something, but sometimes injuring a different survivor is worth the investment for later in the match. Since you're so fast while using your demon dash, it's extremely easy to bait survivors as though you're going in one direction, but then completely switch to the other direction. It's perfectly fine to not slug with your ability. Unlike most other limited time abilities in this game, this one saves your progress when you pick up a survivor, allowing you to get it quickly later. So if you have no information on anybody nearby, just pick up the survivor and don't waste your time looking for people. Bonus tip. Most of you know that doing a basic attack while in your power will only injure them, whereas holding the button does a strong attack that will insta-down them. However, you don't have to actually hold your attack button for the entire animation. As long as you hold it for at least 0.35 seconds, then you'll be able to insta-down them as soon as you let go. Deathslinger. Pulling survivors backwards makes it much more difficult for them to wiggle side to side, as well as increases your reeling speed, which makes it more difficult for the survivors to catch onto objects. There's also a common misconception that the increased reeling speed means that it's faster to pull survivors backwards. This is not true. Yes, the reeling speed is faster, but it's only faster to make up that distance that you're creating by walking away from them. So regardless of the direction you walk, you'll still hit them in the same amount of time. But the reeling speed being technically faster can help to prevent some situations where survivors are trying to take a hit for them. Unlike most other ranged killers, Deathslinger's spear hitbox is significantly smaller, allowing it to go through tiny cracks, so you can shoot through a ton of things like holes in walls or holes in fences. If you're trying to get a hit from far away, keep your camera still while the survivor zigzags to try to avoid your shot. Then shoot when they're about to go in front of where you're aiming to make your long distance shots more consistent. Pyramid Head. Remember that you're not able to put your Torment Trail close to any generators, hooks, exit gate switches, the hatch, any staircase, or anywhere in the basement. So if you're wondering why your trail disappears a couple seconds after you place it, that's why. If you find someone in a cage, you can stand next to them to teleport them to the other side of the map. This is especially useful if your cage timer is low and you know that the other survivors are on the same side of the map as you. Sometimes it's better to hook a survivor that's tormented rather than caging them. This can allow you to use certain perks like pop, pain res, or barbecue and allow you to cage them later in the match. The only way for them to get rid of their torment is to rescue somebody else from a cage, so the likelihood that they'll still be tormented the next time you down them is pretty high. Blight. In order to flick around objects in your power, you should never click your attack button before turning your camera. This will lock your turn radius, so you'll only be able to turn a certain amount. Instead, turn your camera before you click, which will make it much easier to successfully get the flick around an object. For some reason, if you touch a survivor while in your rush, even if they're on the side of your screen, it will still guarantee a hit. So sometimes it's better to be patient and wait for the survivor to be super close to you before swinging, rather than attempting a lunge to hit them. If a survivor vaults a pallet while you're rushing it, it'll prioritize you breaking the pallet rather than you getting the hit. To avoid this, wait until your body's really close to the pallet and then swing. As long as you're not lunging, it'll prioritize hitting the survivor over the pallet. Twins. Use your body to block certain resources when you release Victor. Since your body has collision, it prevents survivors from being able to reach pallets or windows. However, her body does lose collision after 30 seconds of being dormant, so do keep that in mind. Although it doesn't make a significant difference, looking down makes Victor jump shorter, whereas looking up makes Victor jump further, which may come in handy if you're trying to jump over pallets or windows. If you pounce on a healthy survivor, it'll prevent them from leaving through exit gates, so if the survivors are teabagging at a gate, this is an easy way to get a free kill. Trickster. Trickster has zero counterplay in chase unless the loop has tall walls, so whenever possible, try to zone survivors toward loops that you can use your power over, because survivors will be given no options, and it's an extremely easy way to get free hits and downs without having to do anything. It's a lot better to tap fire your knives rather than just holding the button down to throw automatically. This gives you a lot more control while basically having the same exact fire rate. Unlike Huntress, you want to have full ammo before a majority of your chases. So rather than waiting for your knives to deplete fully before reloading, you generally want to reload when you start to get below about 20 knives before you start your next chase. Nemesis. A massively underrated aspect of Nemesis's kit is the fact that you can see your zombies through walls, which gives you a ton of free information. If their arms are up, that means they're locked onto a survivor, so you know someone is nearby. If you see them just kind of standing there with their head pointed towards the sky, that means that a survivor blinded them, so there's likely a survivor working on an important objective near them. And if you ever see that a zombie is walking towards a generator, it's likely because that gen is being worked on. The zombies are attracted to survivor interactions and noise when within a certain distance, so you can infer information based on that. You need to get into tier 2 as fast as possible because the strongest part of his ability is being able to break pallets. So your main priority early in the match should be contaminating 2 different survivors, as that'll automatically put you into tier 2. Feel free to kill your zombies if they're being useless or if they're in a really bad part of the map. This will force them to respawn, potentially putting them somewhere better. Plus, killing them with your tentacle will increase your contamination points by 1, and you need 5 contamination points to get to tier 2 and 9 more contamination points to get to tier 3, so you may as well kill them with your tentacle rather than punching them. Pinhead. If you ever teleport to a survivor solving the box, you will always be facing them when you spawn. So even if you can't see them and they're behind a wall or something, you'll know exactly where they are because you'll be looking straight towards them. If you're using the area add-on that injures survivors rather than chaining them, pair it with a range add-on. This way you can put your chain out of sight and aim it over objects to get injuries without the survivors even expecting it. And from the survivor POV, they basically have no counterplay. Finding the lament configuration is a massive boost in slowdown as it immediately starts your chain hunt. For those of you who don't know, the box spawns as far away from every single survivor as possible, so if you know where all 4 survivors are when it spawns, then you can easily find it. Artist. Try to hit the survivor with only 1 or 2 crows. This makes the cooldown shorter, which allows you to then do the shotgun formation with all 3 crows to almost guarantee a hit on the survivor before they're able to repel the crows that are currently on them. However, if you use all 3 crows to hit them initially, they'll be able to repel the crows before you can hit them again. If you're using your crows for information on what gens are being worked on, always try to line generators up so you can check more than one gen with a single crow to gain more information. Although survivors get a brief invulnerability period after getting hit with a crow, you can still double tap them with your crows if you set them up properly. You can do so by placing a crow and then walking either forward or backward for about 3/4 of the time before the crow dissipates, then placing your next crow. This should hit a survivor twice, instantly injuring or downing them. Onryo. Remember that your strongest ability is condemning the survivor, which you can do easily by teleporting to TVs near them. So if you're chasing a survivor and they're running towards a TV, it's usually worth it to teleport to that TV to increase their condemned stacks, even if it's going to make your chase longer. It's worth the investment because the survivor will be forced to grab a tape and take it to another TV, which gives you a ton of slowdown, and if they don't, then you get a free instamori. She is fully invisible to any survivor at least 24 meters away from you while demanifested, so you can get free information information on survivor whereabouts from far away, even without them knowing. You have no collision while demanifested, so you can walk straight through survivors that are trying to body block you, and it's impossible for pallets to stun you. Bonus tip, if your TVs are static, that means there's no survivors nearby. However, if they're playing this video, that actually means that there's a survivor nearby, so if you don't see any scratch marks, that means they're hiding near the TV. Dredge, never teleport during chase. You may think this is a great way to cut survivors off, but any survivor that has a single brain cell will easily see or hear you do this and will make a ton of distance. Plus, if that locker is locked, you'll lose even more distance, so it's just overall not worth it. Whenever you teleport back to your remnant, you will always be facing the same direction that you placed it, so make sure you place your remnant in the direction you want to be facing when you teleport. The best part about Dredge's power is when you're in Nightfall. A lot of people think that Nightfall just happens randomly, but there are a few things that can cause Nightfall to happen quicker. Think of it like this. You need a total of 300 points for Nightfall to begin. By default, you get 1 point every 4 seconds during daytime, and then by doing any of the following actions, you get extra points. Every injured survivor gives you 1 extra point per second. Hiding inside of a locker gives you 6 points per second. Teleporting to your remnant gives you 10 points. Hooking a survivor gives you 20 points. And lastly, injuring a survivor gives you 20 points. So similar to killers like Oni, if you want to trigger Nightfall as much as possible, the best way to do so is by injuring as many different survivors that you can. Wesker, if you're able to, it's much better to hit a survivor with your power than to hit them with a basic attack. This will start their infection meter, which pretty much forces them to go get a first aid spray, so it's built-in slowdown. Plus, if they get fully infected, then they get hindered, which makes them a lot slower while running. In most situations, vaulting pallets in your power should be avoided because there's so much time for the survivor to loop back around to the pallet. Unless it's a god pallet or a pallet that doesn't really connect to any other resources, I would recommend just not vaulting them. Be patient with your second dash if you know you can guarantee the hit. Since your second dash is twice as long as the first one, if you miss it, you'll go flying way past the survivor, which makes you take way longer to catch up. Try to zone the survivor into an area where if you miss, you'll at least hit something to stop yourself. I see so many people just instantly trying to get that second dash and then will fly straight past the survivors and will have to spend an extra 10 to 15 seconds catching up to them. Knight, don't be afraid to cancel summoning your guard if you don't think it's going to do anything. For example, if you're using the jailer to check a generator but you hear that the gen doesn't have any progress, then you may as well cancel it rather than placing it and getting no use out of it. Guards ignore elevation, so this can be extremely useful for double story areas like the top story generator on Dead Dog. Guards are attracted to loud noise notifications, so if you have a guard on a lower elevation and a loud noise notification goes off above them, they will ignore the elevation and go towards the noise. The longer your patrol path is, the more benefits you gain. It'll give you haste for a certain amount of time, decrease the time it takes for a guard to lock onto a survivor, increase the duration of the hunt, and increase the time it takes for the flag to spawn. Bonus tip, you can hit your guard to recall him back to you and set its cooldown to 10 seconds. Skull Merchant, if you have survivors tracked on your radar, you can tell if they're a higher or lower elevation than you if their dot is a triangle rather than a square. Don't place drones near gens. Drones can only detect survivors if they're moving, so survivors can work on gens and be completely undetectable. By holding your radar and looking at a drone, you can press the attack button to change the directions of the scan lines, which can give you free injures on survivors in loops because nobody knows how to counter the Skull Merchant because nobody plays her. Singularity, you can shoot already placed biopods to remove them and put them back in your inventory. This is extremely useful if you accidentally put one in a bad spot. You can instantly break pallets if you teleport to a slipstream survivor on the other side of the pallet. However, if they're mid-vault while you do this, it won't actually break it, so be sure to wait until their vault animation is completely finished before shooting them. If you're putting biopods on high elevations to watch generators, make sure you put them on the side of the gen so you can see every single position where the survivor could work on that gen. Otherwise, they could work on the opposite side of the gen and make your biopod completely useless. Xenomorph, your tail's hitbox is actually active for a few milliseconds while it's extended. This means you can drag it to essentially make it more likely that you'll hit the survivor. This is amazing on certain loops because you can aim a little bit higher and then drag it down to get the hit over the wall. However, as soon as the tail hitbox hits a single collision, that few milliseconds where it's active will completely deactivate. You should completely ignore turrets that are in bad locations that will never affect you. Survivors only get a certain amount of turrets, and if you destroy it, then they will be able to place it in a better spot. Let the useless turret just exist over there and be as lonely as all of the Kaneki players running 4 slowdowns. Hitting turrets with a basic attack is a lot faster than hitting it with your tail, so if you're able to, try to do that whenever possible. Chucky, having a third-person camera is a surprisingly useful part of his kit, so use it to your advantage. While in chase, you can hide and wait around corners, essentially as killer check spots to see what the survivor is going to do. Survivors can see your footsteps through walls on loops where they would normally be able to see an average height killer, so even though you're physically shorter, you won't be able to mind game them in loops because they basically have wall hacks. Remember that you can cancel your slice and dice. Some survivors will avoid doing certain things such as going towards a window if they hear you start your ability, but then you could just cancel it and hit them normally. Unknown, if you want the UVX to explode instantly without it being shot on the ground, aim towards a 90-degree corner such as where a wall meets a ceiling. This will cause it to explode instantly since it's technically bouncing twice in rapid succession. You can tell when a new hallucination is ready to be placed when the goop stuff on the side of your screen reaches about 33%. So if you're trying to place your hallucination in a specific spot, keep this in mind. Survivors can see your hallucinations through walls when they're close by, so there's no point in trying to hide them. Instead, focus on putting them in better positions such as near windows or pallets. Bonus tip: if your hallucination is ready to be placed, but you need just a few more seconds so you can put it in a better position, just spam click your UVX button. Whenever your UVX is out, it'll pause the timer so you can continue to spam click it until you're in the spot that you want. So if you keep spamming it, then you won't be able to place the hallucination until you put it away. For some reason, the DBD community refers to the strategy as edging. Vecna: the strongest part of your ranged attack isn't the fact that you can get hits with it, as that's pretty rare. Instead, use it as a slowdown tool since it forces survivors to crouch. There are plenty of times where you can catch survivors before they make it to a resource just by forcing them to crouch for a bit. The best way to use Mage Hand, in my opinion, is as soon as the survivor throws the pallet. Usually, if you use it to block a pallet, the survivor will have enough time to make it to either another resource or back around the loop to the same pallet when the Mage Hand disappears. However, if you use it while the survivor is dropping the pallet, it'll instantly lift it back up and give you a free hit. Of course, the downside of this is the fact that it gives them another use of that pallet, so don't use this trick on good pallets like the one at Shack. You completely lose collision with survivors when you're flying, so you can fly straight through them to beat them to a resource and cancel your fly to force them away from that resource or get a hit. Dracula: while in bat form, survivors' footsteps are 50% louder. This can be useful to find survivors, but just remember that they will sound closer than they actually are because they're louder, so don't let that throw you off. If you could see a survivor's head over an obstacle, that generally means that you're able to use your Hellfire attack to get hits over the wall. By pouncing into a wall in your wolf form, it means your second attack will be much quicker. You can use this to your advantage to throw off the timing of survivors. Bonus tip: since you can teleport to down pallets in your bat form, it's sometimes worth it to leave certain pallets down so you have better or more teleport spots. Houndmaster: if you send your dog out with the search command, you will detect any survivor even if they're in lockers. This could be super useful information if you're playing against people with head-on so you can easily get hits. Use your dog to scare survivors away from a certain part of the loop. Since there's always the threat of you redirecting the dog when you send it out in chase, survivors will likely switch their attention to where you place the dog rather than watching where you are, which you can use to your advantage to push them towards you and secure a hit. Similar to other killers, if you grab a survivor with your dog, they're unable to leave through the exit gates, giving you a free kill. Bonus tip: if you stand still for a couple seconds, your dog will sit down. Hold spacebar to pet your dog. The Ghoul: a lot of people don't realize that this killer has a quick time event that activates when you do a grab attack. If you perfectly time your attack button when the quick time event appears on your screen, your countdown timer will be extended by 10 seconds. Be patient when going for long range dashes. Wait for the icon to turn red before clicking. It's much worse and much more frustrating to miss your leap entirely than to just wait a second longer to connect with the wall. Make sure you have a working internet connection. As long as you have a working internet connection, it'll give you free hits without any counterplay. Springtrap: remember that you can disable cameras and their doors by throwing your axe on it. So if a survivor is tracking you while you're in chase, throw your axe on the door to stop their wall hacks. You become faster when the axe is not in your inventory, so you should never recall your axe as soon as you're able to. Instead, wait to recall your axe until you're actually going to use it, otherwise you'll just be slowing yourself down for no reason. If you're inside of a door and you hear a beep sound, look around for a yellow door. This is an indication that a survivor is using that door, so you should teleport to it to get a free grab. If you learned something new, drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and come check out this video on screen of 32 things that you should never do as killer. Over 300,000 people found it helpful, so I can guarantee that you will too.